and things are happening in this Torah portion so quickly. First of all, I mean, the whole introduction of Moshe into our consciousness now, that's going to be with us for the rest of the Torah, with the exception of one parsha, and his whole coming of age, as it were, and the whole mystique of Moshe having basically been raised as an outsider, in the house of Pharaoh, and it's just so compelling. But I'm still stuck on the first page of the parsha, of the beginning of the book of Exodus, because there's so many parallels to things that I think are the lessons for our time. But getting back to the whole idea of the new king and his decision that something has to be done about the problem of the Jews. One of the key verses here is we read that first of all, as far as the cities that they were building, right, the storage cities. You mentioned Ramses. You're familiar with the idea that our sages tell us that these cities were self-destruct cities, right? You're familiar with this idea. A lot of the elements of this, there are stages here. There are stages of persecution, stages of that we're changing all the time, and some of the things that are being described are like a certain type of psychological warfare. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that our sages tell us is that they had them working all day long in a certain kind of futile activity, because they would build these cities. They would be working all day long on erecting these vast structures and towers and buildings, and at the end of the day, somehow everything would implode, and they had to start the next day all over again. And as it wasn't even about storage, it wasn't even about something of functionality. It was about keeping them occupied, but not really keeping them occupied, keeping them in a state of despair. Because there's nothing as frustrating as seeing that you're being worked to the death and nothing is even happening from it.
And they were dangerous too. What's the word used in the Torah? I can't think of the word, but describing the walls, it means that they were dangerous. And the oral tradition tells us that it was that the laborers, the Israelite laborers.
Arei miskanot literally means dangerous, right.
And I have been to a site there in the Delta, Rabbi, that's called Tel El Maskuta.
Wow.
It literally carries the name that we see in the Bible for these dangerous walls.
So these amazing teachings of our sages are making it sound as if there was some sort of a self-destruct mechanism or some sort of a button, which at the end of the day they would press, and everything, before their horrified eyes, everything would kind of implode. Again, the idea being that whether or not this is literal is not the point at all, because there is a theme that's being developed as we read these verses, that there was employed against the Israelites this massive kind of psychological warfare. And one of the key verses of all of this is here in the beginning, in the first chapter. It is verse 14 that says they embittered their lives with hard work, with mortar and with bricks and with every labor of the field. All their labors that they performed with them were with crushing hardness. And the word is befarech, right? So it's translated as harsh or as crushing hardness. And there's a key teaching here of our sages that explains that the word is a contraction of the two words perach, which means kind of like a soft mouth, like a gentle speech. And the whole idea that in the beginning, it's the way that it started, was that Pharaoh was very, very sweet and very kind of homey, and he was participating with them with the work himself, and he
rolled up his
sleeves, and he was like a man of the people, and he said, "Come, just do this one thing for me, and I'm with you." And it's a national effort, and it's teamwork, and he got right into it with them, and he started making the bricks, and it was all very, very kind of sweet talking, is the way that you would describe this concept of farech, or kind of almost like a Esavian kind of mouth hunting. It was like a deception, like this type of gaslighting, like this
Yeah.
this type of fooling. And then
He laid the first brick.
Right.
He laid the first brick.
Right.
They had a big ceremony.
Right.
Singers and harpers and all this, and it's like like when they ground break today.
Right.
He laid a golden brick or something and said, this is a national effort. And of course, he spoke to their greatest strength and their greatest weakness, in that the Jewish people have always been wonderful citizens of the country they lived in. They've always been the best. They've always been very patriotic.
And it went in stages, in that, and that's the significance of the different terms that are used in this verse: hard work, and with mortar, and with bricks, and every type of labor in the field. That it started out first just making bricks, and it went on, and then this reference to the field is what we began to speak about earlier, that they made it so difficult for them that they had to literally sleep on the work site in the fields, because they had such a grueling schedule, and they had such a grueling quota that they had to produce, that they weren't able to go home. But this was actually a device to make sure that they would not return home, so that they would not be able to be together with their wives. And
what did the wives do?
This is all being signaled by this whole concept of what was going on in the field, that they made them sleep in the fields. But the wives, they, again, with tremendous dedication, knowing that this was all like extremely prophetic. And again, this was the whole feminine counterpart, the Shekhinah, the whole kind of understanding that the wives had about the place that they were in history, and the necessity, just like Yaakov's wives. We commented about it then in Parshat Vayetze, how they were so driven, how they seemed to be so obsessed, how they seemed to be so completely, with tremendous amount of tension, like they must have these children now. So too the women of Israel understood that the redemption was dependent on them, and that they had to bring these children into the world. And so they would come to their husbands in the fields, and they brought them water, and they brought them fish. And the Torah talks about a whole miracle, that when they would draw water up from the wells, that there were these little fish in it, and of course fish is the symbol of fecundity, also of Peri Virivia, of being fruitful and multiply. It's the mazal of the month of Adar. And so they brought them food and water, and they made themselves beautiful in these copper mirrors, which became the secret of the mirrors that the women brought for their donation to make the copper laver in the tabernacle. Which Moshe, his first reaction was, I'm not going to accept this, because it's actually has a bad connotation. But then Hashem said, no, you're wrong, because this is what they used in order to arouse their husbands, so that they should have the strength to bring these children. So when it was all for the sake of heaven. So anyway, so that's one aspect of the Chazal say of this befarech, of this hard labor kind of, this whole program and campaign that they had to try and see to it that they would not be able to bring children into the world. One aspect was that they tried to separate them, and then later Moshe kills an Egyptian. And the backstory that Chazal tell us is that the Egyptian taskmasters would come in and rouse the Israelites out of bed very, very early. This is before they started the new stage of having them sleep in the field. And he comes into an Israelite's house, and he sees his wife, and when he kicks the fellow out to go and do his work, he takes his wife, and then the Israelite became aware of it, and that's why he was beating him every day. Yeah, and that's the Egyptian that Moshe killed, according to this understanding.